Yeah, she's got some nice long hair.
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron, and welcome back to a fantasy episode of today's show. And make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching out there on YouTube. And also for those listening, make sure to rate 5 stars. It's the best way to get this show out to the people. We're also currently donating 20% of what we make over to the Thorn organization that helps fight human trafficking. So thank you for listening because it helps out tremendously. And I'll be donating an extra $1 for every 5-star rating we get out on Spotify. And we're currently up to 23. So make sure to rate 5 stars and help out a great organization. But with me here today, we had some troubles. We still don't have Commissioner Cooper from TSS Fantasy on because he's in the middle of a hurricane. But who is joining me today, Mr. Dan Mader from MD's Fantasy Football Show. Dan, how are you doing? And can you tell us a little bit about your fantasy football show?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Brad, thank you for having me on. It's actually very difficult for me to make guest appearances. I'm so busy during the week. Most people are usually recording the same time I'm recording. So I was glad you welcomed me on, had me on a Sunday. I was able to get on here because I like making guest appearances. Don't get to do it very often. So I really appreciate you doing the reach out for me. And my name is Dan Mader, host of the MD's Fantasy Football Show. You can check us out on YouTube, anywhere on your favorite podcast app. We're pretty much widely available, and on social media at Billy Up MDFF Show. And it's a fantasy football show that's been going on for about, this will be our 4th season, I think, actually, now this year. We just got back from the expo last week. That was a total blast. Got to meet a lot of people there, network with Belly Up Fantasy, meet some people in person for the first time since I've been with the company. So that was really fun and entertaining. Also, there was a lot of great people there, the fans that we were able to talk to, get them turned on to Belly Up Fantasy, get them turned on to the MD's Fantasy Football Show. I was part of the redraft discussions over there. So really had a great time in Canton last week and looking to grow from there, man.
Yeah, and if anybody has heard Dan's voice before and is not familiar with this show, he does the outro for the Belly Up plug at the very end of the show. So if it's ringing some bells and you don't know why, that's the big reason why. When I first heard your voice, I did the whole Leo DiCaprio pointing at the screen. I'm like, that's it. That's the voice.
I don't know if I have my voice right now or not. Maybe you could tell me, but I am getting a little bit over having to deal with COVID for the first time. Of course, now is when I get COVID after the pandemic is supposed to be over. But so I don't know if I'm my top shape today, but I'll try to bring as much as I can.
Sounds good because I know a little bit about fantasy. I'm like the average Joe at fantasy, I feel. So that's why we had to bring in some experts. So everyone else that's out there listening, make sure to post your questions out there at the end. We'll have Dan get out to them. And then hopefully Commissioner Cooper from TSS Fantasy can be on. We'll see if the hurricane has subsided and he's able to get his power back. But before we get into fantasy football, we do have to break a little bit of news. This is a Chicago Bears show. The biggest news was Roquan Smith back at practice and basically said, listen, I'm going to be playing for the Chicago Bears. Contract talks are kind of done. So he's going to play out the rest of this season and then we'll see. Honestly, I think he's just going to get franchise tagged. He's not going to be happy about it, but it's like a $18 million cap hit. And then I think that's the best way to go about it. And you can maybe trade him for some picks, but it's nice to have the leader of the defense back on this team. And hopefully this means some wins, but we'll just have to see what that turns into. And Dan, I'm excited to get your non-biased opinion on this Chicago Bears team. So let's get started with some fantasy football talk. Now, before we get started, even with this, I want to bring up, I don't know if you've noticed this, Dan, but there's something very interesting about drafting a Chicago Bears player. Do you know what that is?
It's hard, but
so definitely that's one of the answers. But the other thing is the last 5 weeks that they have. So let's just say you have, let's just say you don't want to have your playoffs end on the 18th week of the year, right? So you don't want it at the final week of the season. The Bears' final 5 games are a bye week at week 14, then week 15 against the Eagles, then the Bills. So 2 difficult teams, the Lions, and the Vikings. So I just want to call that out because something to at least think about is if your playoffs start at week 14, these players aren't going to be available to you then. So
Well, I will say, typically speaking, playoffs now start at week 15 since it's been moved. Since we got the extra week, it usually is going to start at week 15, 16, and then 17 is going to be the championship week, typically speaking.
Perfect, because that's why we needed you on to know where everything's out. I've even seen half PPR leagues nowadays, and I'm like, I'm just going with full PPRs. I already made the transition over to that. But let's get started with QB1. So to start this off, asked around just where we have Justin Fields ranked. So the overall average draft position as it sits right now, so as people are drafting, he's going about QB 17. I have him ranked QB 14, and Dan has him ranked QB 20, and TSS has him ranked all the way down at QB 24. So Dan, QB 20. So you like him a little bit less than the whole average. Why is that?
Well, Fields is in a tough spot. All right. So he's a guy who has a very wide range of outcomes. Would I be shocked if Justin Fields finished in the top 12? No, it wouldn't shock me, especially if he does what he did at the end of last season. He was actually on pace from week 6 on for 126 rush attempts. Typically speaking, if you are going to get over 100 rush attempts, you're going to be hovering around that top end QB2, low end QB1 territory. When I say that, I mean somewhere between the QB 10 and QB 15, typically speaking. Now, the reason why I have him lower than that, though, is because you have to go back to the fact that, well, Darnell Mooney, you have to lean on him to be your main and almost only pass catcher. We still have to see Cole Kmet break out, who we're going to talk about later in the show. But then you also have to add in the fact that you brought in Luke Getsy to run, who has not called plays since he did back in 2019 for a college team. He has not called plays at all in the NFL. And as the quarterback coach to Aaron Rodgers, I don't really know how much credit you want to give him for there either. So there's a lot of question marks for me when it comes to Luke Getsy. And if he does similar to what LaFleur did, well, you're talking about a maybe 53 to 47% run the pass ratio, very balanced attack. I don't know how many stats Justin Fields is going to get this season outside of rushing, and he's going to have to Jalen Hurts' way, which has been a very common phrase lately with pretty much synonymous with quarterbacks who are not doing much in the passing game, but maybe they can get you touchdowns. Here's the thing about Jalen Hurts, though. He got 10 rushing touchdowns last season that led the quarterbacks. So if you're going to tell me Justin Fields is going to have to lead the quarterbacks in rushing touchdowns in order to make up his fantasy value, it's unlikely to happen. Not impossible to happen, but unlikely to happen. And he's a guy that getting 20 passing touchdowns this year is a bit of a question mark as far as him being able to do that. So for me, I got him at QB 20. There is a wider range of outcomes when it comes for him, but not as high on him as the ADP, or not as high as you are.
Yeah, I kind of was expecting a little bit about that, but you made some good points out there. Now, another storyline that I've heard with Justin Fields is he's frequently injured. Does that factor into your fear at all? Like, how much do you weigh in potential injury with this offensive line?
Well, I don't weigh too much with it with Justin Fields. So when I weigh an injury when I'm doing my projections, it's usually players that have a real historical track record of injury. Honestly, when it comes to Justin Fields, his is not much more different than the average player. So I don't really factor that into a greater degree than I would anybody else. And it wasn't really a factor here either.
Makes sense. Awesome. So let me defend myself at QB 14. I'm going to try and pretend like I'm not a homer. And reason why. So what I actually wanted to do is I wanted to put N+1. You know, like, to me, the way that I draft is I feel like there's so much depth at that quarterback position. You can get somebody that gets you good production. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for someone that could get me those 20 points. So Dan, you talked a little bit about it with towards the tail end of the season, Fields was doing good from a fantasy perspective. And I believe the last 4 full games that he played, he had over 19 points a game, which is top 10 for quarterbacks. So that's something that I would rather take a high flyer that can, you know, like I might go Dak Prescott first, and then I could pick up a Justin Fields to hopefully hit like a home run with 20 plus points per game, because I don't want to be playing my quarterback too much out there. And that's why I have him up at 14, because I can't in good conscience like put him over like a Aaron Rodgers or a Matt Stafford or anything like that. But his rushing ability makes him really, really interesting to have out there as well. So so let's keep on moving right now. So QB 17 overall, but you have him down at 20. I have him at 14. But let's keep moving to the running game. So Luke Getsy's saying that this is going to be a rush first team. So right now, the NFL on average, they are drafting him about RB 18. My rating is I have him at RB 16, and Dan is higher than me at running back 15. And TSS, I copied with that, and he has him out at running back 16. So Dan, high on David Montgomery. Why is that?
Well, and look, there's no secret when it comes to the NFL now. There's running backs by committee all over the place. I know there's been some talk about, it's Khalil Herbert. This is a new coaching regime. Do they use him a little bit more? Even if they do, there's nobody else on the roster who's going to come in and work on the passing downs. That's going to be David Montgomery. He's going to get all the check downs. And when you factor in the fact that, look, it's Mooney and a big question mark as to who, as far as next pass catchers are going to be, that guy most likely is Montgomery. Montgomery has proven if he's going to get that much work in both the rushing and the receiving game, he can actually be a top 10 running back. We've seen that in the past before. Running backs traditionally are more efficient on a yards per carry basis with mobile quarterbacks as well. Maybe he loses out on some rushing touchdowns. That's a possibility there with Justin Fields. It's not enough for me to come off of him, and that's why I have him at RB 15. He's one of the few guys that are looking at a 3-down workhorse set that a lot of guys in that territory especially just aren't looking at. They're usually in more committee outputs. I like David Montgomery a lot this year. It's not always going to be pretty, but the volume's going to get him there.
Yeah, and the reason why I feel like I'm not as high as some other like Bears fans out there on him too is I'm just curious about Khalil Herbert. But what's making me more optimistic about David Montgomery and kind of sad as a Bears fan is Khalil Herbert hasn't looked great in the preseason this year. And so Montgomery might get more of the carries. And when I was out on TSS's fantasy show, I heard from Mikey Betts that David Montgomery might get traded, but that was also like a month ago. That was at the very beginning of training camp, and there's been no other murmurs. So right now it looks like he's going to stay on the team. I've heard that there might be some contract negotiations. If he gets a contract extension, they're going to run this guy into the ground. They're going to just run him like crazy. I think that he's going to go up. But yeah, I think like for me, what I think about with David Montgomery is that floor is going to be higher. I think that in a better offense, Matt Nagy's offense never did much. So I think that there's going to be a higher floor. But Dan, I really liked your take just from the passing attempts too. Because right now in preseason, I don't know how much preseason ball you've been watching. Running backs cannot pass protect. Like people talk about the offensive line. These running backs, not including Montgomery, have been letting people blow by and just hit them. So right now the team's probably saying, we got to have Montgomery out there to keep our quarterback alive. But anything else from the running back perspective?
Well, I was going to say, like, I like Khalil Herbert. I liked him a lot coming out of college during the process. But to your point there, he's a good runner who has natural vision, but even in college, lacked pass pro ability, lacked route running ability. He's never going to take that role from a David Montgomery. No one else on the roster is going to be able to. And that right there, the pass protection is something that gets overlooked in fantasy circles all the time when it comes to running backs. They get swamped up in the ability, what the potential target share could be, but they never look at the fact that unless you're a running back who knows how to pass protect, you're not going to be out there on third downs to begin with. It's the biggest thing with rookies in particular. Everyone gets excited about these rookie running backs coming in, but very few already know how to pass pro. And Breece Hall, he's one of them. He already knows what he's doing. Kenneth Walker, though, he has a longer way to go. Just instances like that where it's going to affect their playing time, where maybe they're not getting more of the share that you're expecting until the later half of the season. Same thing comes in with Khalil Herbert. It's why I never had any fear about David Montgomery getting traded. I heard that rumor before. I never put much stock into it. And it's why I know that Herbert or nobody else in the roster is going to be able to take away that role from Montgomery at the end of the day either. He's the best pass protection guy, not only the best pass catcher.
Yeah, and I see another Iowa State product in Brees Hall. And so they must be just, you have your one down, you have your running back that plays all three downs that can do it all. And yeah, the more that I think about this, the higher that I am on Montgomery, just because that upside, and for sure. But let's move on to the next position. And this one to me, this was the hardest thing. I don't know how you do this, Dan, from a fantasy football perspective, but wide receivers are like next to impossible because everybody has 1,000 yards and like 70 catches and a handful of touchdowns. So Darnell Mooney is now the true number one out there. The NFL, on average, he's being drafted at wide receiver 24. And that's exactly where I have him on my rankings, wide receiver 24. And Dan, you have him wide receiver 27, just a little bit down. And TSS Fantasy has him all the way down at wide receiver 37. That might be why Coop isn't on here, because he doesn't want to face the fans saying he's wide receiver 37. That's how his power went out, I think. But you have him wide receiver 27. What do you like about Darnell Mooney?
Well, the floor, the targets are going to be there. He's not just the number one receiver. You can make the argument he might be the only receiver that they actually have legitimately to go to. And him and Justin Fields had a good rapport last season. So the floor is why I like Darnell Mooney, especially as a wide receiver 3. The problem is, and why I don't have him quite in the wide receiver 2 territory, which is that cutoff right there at wide receiver 24. And I have him more at the high end wide receiver 3, which is where you had that wide receiver 27 mark at, is because of the touchdown rate. This is not a big touchdown producer, especially in the red zone. Last season, he had about a 3.3% touchdown rate. Or no, I'm sorry. Last year, he had 2.8. His career is a 3.3 touchdown rate. That's not going to get it done as far as being that wide receiver 2. You have to see that come up, but then at the same time, we're dealing with a quarterback who I don't project for scoring many touchdowns or throwing many touchdowns to begin with. So I don't think this is the year that he necessarily makes the jump in that area of the field. Big plays and targets will be the name of his game, and that's why I think he's got a really safe floor. I like him a lot in fantasy. If I can get him as my wide receiver 3, I'm definitely happy, but he doesn't really have that upside to me because the touchdowns are going to be lacking.
That makes sense. Definitely, you have a small stature receiver. That's what was hard for me to put him in that wide receiver 2 category as well, because yeah, he's going to get some catches. And like I was saying before, there's a million wide receivers out here that you go, oh, that guy. It was difficult. That was the hardest part for me. Was I think Mooney's going to get 1,200 receiving yards. He's the number one target. He's been working out with Justin Fields. They're like the same type of person. Like they're just this work ethic freak. But what about the touchdowns? That's the biggest question. I know that he can do some of that, but when you're drafting him next to, if Chris Godwin's on the board, if Michael Thomas, Allen Robinson's on the board, that's where it's hard for me to necessarily say, is this number one target? Like, I love it. Like, the floor is great on him because you know he's going to get everything, but can you count on him week in and week out to get a touchdown or some of those bigger numbers out there?
Yeah, those are great names that you just listed out too, because those are all the names I have directly in front of him as of right now too.
Yeah, it's to me, I'm looking at a list right now. I'd take him over Gabriel Davis, Adam Thielen, Jerry Jeudy. I'm not a Jerry Jeudy guy because he's always banged up. He's always injured. And this is also why I might not be a fantasy football expert. But but at the same time, I think that he is just it's hard. I like that, Darnell's going to get fed targets and he's going to be in this. And if people are barreling down on him, Mooney's probably going to get a catch. They have that synergy with him and Fields. They're working on that. But yeah, like we were saying too, I would love to get TSS Fantasy's opinion on this, because wide receiver 37, that's where I don't even know who he would have. Like,
well, just looking at the rankings that you had here, I didn't get to talk to Jason before this show or anything like that, but I'm just judging off of that idea that he must have Chicago's offense being one of the worst offenses in the NFL. It's the only thing I'd be able to figure of why he has some of these rankings set up the way he does.
That's got to be it. Just assuming that, all right, there's not going to be much going on or something like that. So But let's go over to the last player that we have out here, and that is Cole Kmet. So this one we are universally, I guess you could say, down on. Down sounds bad, but he's typically being drafted tight end 11 across fantasy leagues. And universally, we all said tight end 14. I had him there, you had him there, and Jason had him there as well. So, what do you like about Cole Kmet, and why isn't he tight end 13, tight end 11?
Well, what I do like about Cole Kmet is he's a good talent. He's got natural receiving skills. He can play all three downs because he can block. And also, they need to find that second pass catcher. There's a real chance Cole Kmet could be that guy from a target standpoint. So there's another safe floor to go along with it. But unless you are an elite tier tight end, you're Travis Kelce, a Mark Andrews, a George Kittle, a Kyle Pitts, a Darren Waller, you need touchdowns in order to be a top tight end one. That's something Cole Kmet doesn't do very well. Hasn't done it no matter what the quarterback has been. And that's why I wound up having him at my tight end 14, because what's going to happen every year in fantasy is that there's usually two guys minimum, sometimes three, who will surprise you with like an 8% or higher touchdown rate. And usually that'll result in 9 to 12 touchdowns. And that's going to be the guy who is going to be finishing in the top 12 of tight ends. That doesn't set up to be Cole Kmet necessarily unless he's able to take that next big jump.
Yeah, and I don't like to brag about my NFL career, but I scored as many touchdowns as Cole Kmet did last year, which was 0. So, so that's huge. Like in all seriousness, that is huge. And like Nomad down in the comments said, it's the wrong time to be down on Kmet. This is a very tight end friendly offense, and I agree with him. I agree that he's going to get a lot of yards. He had 612, but kind of piggybacking off of what you said, Dan, that it's the touchdown game. And I go back for those that listened to the tight end episode when we had Clay Harbor on. He talked about Cole Kmet just seemed a little out of place in the red zone. And that's something that you don't want to see out there or hear for that matter, because he's trying to finesse people rather than use his body to his advantage. And that's why I think that he's going, if this was just a pure catches and yards, I think he's a top 10 tight end, because I don't like Dawson Knox too much. I think that he gets way too much hype. Like, I think that this guy, I think Kmet is going to be a top 10 tight end when it comes to those receptions and yards, but the touchdowns, it's hard. I'm thinking maybe 3 or 4, but yeah, it doesn't give you much confidence, even though that Jimmy Graham's gone, right?
Yeah, and look, it should be a third-year breakout, but I want to push back on that a little bit on the tight end-friendly offense part of it. I know a couple years ago, Robert Tonyan had a crazy amount of touchdowns, but he really wasn't that involved overall in the offense when he looked at it. And since Jermichael Finley, I can't remember the last time there was a relevant Green Bay tight end. So I don't know how tight end-friendly this offense truly is. Not to knock Cole Kmet or what his role in this offense could particularly be, but I haven't really seen it come from Luke Getsy that this is suddenly a tight end friendly offense. The tight ends are out there a lot, mostly because they're blocking for the running backs, though. So we'll just have to take that into consideration. But it should be a third year, hopefully a breakout. The big key, of course, is going to come down to, can Justin Fields get more efficient in the red zone? Can Cole Kmet get more efficient in the red zone? If those two things come together, then I think we could be looking at a top 10 tight end. But going into it, it's something just haven't seen yet and haven't had a lot of promise about yet, which is why I'm not ranking it yet.
It's a good point you make with the Green Bay Packers offense, because I know watching the Packers as well, to me, when Tonyan had all those catches, I live in Wisconsin. So I was hearing it from all Packer fans, like Bobby Tonyan's the best, tight end in the league, and just everything like that. But the big reason why he was so great was the chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. We talk about it too, just what wide receiver is going to be the best on that team for Green Bay. He's all about trusting his receivers, knowing where they're going to be. And it seemed like Tonyan just kind of had that chemistry and knew where to be, knew where to sit in some of those zones. And that's where, I think Kmet needs to learn that. But one thing, we did see a little bit of the offense, and for anybody that watched that, the PFF grades came out, and in 9 snaps, Cole Kmet graded as an elite tight end with his 90 plus grade. So he looked good in 9 snaps. So small sample size be damned. He is he's an elite tight end, at least from that. But yeah, Nomad was saying too, yeah, just with the naked boots out there, too, which we saw in the preseason game as well. So hopefully they run a little bit more of that. You get it to him in the open field. We know that he loves the truck stick. He's just going to barrel down with his head down. So hopefully he can kind of pick up some of those yards. But also, just as a reminder for those that might be just new jumping in, make sure to post some of your questions out there. We have a couple questions primed for Dan. So if you are curious who you should be drafting, who he might be high on as like a sleeper, make sure to post it out there. But Dan, anything else from Cole Kmet?
Really not too much else. Like he's a very efficient guy though, like 64.5% catch rate. The targets again should be there. Look, there's a real upside of him being the second best pass catcher on this team. So there's definitely something to be had from that standpoint. And I will say this: like I'm in a bunch of drafts, and I've been drafting and giving out advice, and a lot of people ask me about tight ends in particular. And the one rule that I've kind of had lately is that I'm not drafting anybody below TJ Hawkinson, who I have ranked at my tight end 8. And I have Dallas Goedert at 7, Schultz at 6, because after that tier, it becomes very much a crapshoot. But if you have to put a gun to my head and say, take somebody outside that tier, I'm looking at Cole Kmet, I'm looking at Mike Gesicki as those two guys that I'm targeting in that area later on if you're just waiting completely at tight end, which is something in years past I usually have liked to do, but there's a very more defined, distinct teardrop right now than there has been in years past. There's not as many sleepers as I like this year. People bring up David Njoku. I'm not really a big fan of his, especially with Deshaun Watson being suspended for 11 games. I know Brissett likes to throw to the tight end, but typically doesn't get a tight end touchdowns, so I don't know how that's going to really work. There's been guys who brought up Albert O, but Albert O is playing, 4 full quarters with the preseason team right now because they've been so disappointed with his production too. So I don't know how much I like that one. To me, I'm looking at Mike Gesicki, I'm looking at Cole Kmet as those guys that if I'm going to take a tight end much later, that is what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I don't get the Albert O hype because I was looking at that and yeah, same thing. It's like I like Kmet more than a lot of these and the upside. Because what if they start running these because it looks like they're going to be doing more bootlegs. What if they're trying to trick some people and they start throwing it to them? Because to me, it's that I think a lot of these players, they have the floor. I mean, except for Fields. Fields has this wide range of outcomes, I feel, but I feel like there's somewhat of a floor where they can start catching some of these passes and trying to get some touchdowns out there. So, but I kind of want to ask you too, is there anyone else on this Bears offense so Byron Pringle, Khalil Herbert, and there's also Equanimous St. Brown is now actually listed as the number 2 wide receiver. Any of those that kind of stick out, or even a Velus Jones Jr., anybody kind of stick out to you or not so much?
Well, if you're talking like deep sleeper, I do have a couple of best ball leagues where I drafted Velus Jones Jr. with like my last round pick and stuff like that. I do find it interesting, and maybe as the Bears guy, you could tell me more. I find it interesting they seem to be pushing Velus Jones as the slot receiver they really want to use. And if that's going to be the case, that is crucial to know because that gives him a certain floor when it comes to a particular amount of targets. And while I'm not a big fan of his, wasn't a big fan of his when you guys drafted him, especially when you did in the 3rd round, I believe it was, he should have enough of a role and enough of explosive ability where he might be interesting in some games here or there, which makes him a best ball target. I know you guys aren't necessarily fantasy football, but if you guys haven't played before, best ball is basically you're not sitting there setting your lineups. You draft your team, and whoever has the best performance that week gets to be put in the slot automatically as your starter. So it tailors more to guys like a Velus Jones who are maybe going to have a really big game once every 4 to 6 games or so. And Taylor makes those. So I did take him and late in a couple of best ball drafts. Outside of that, though, no. I mean, Echo St. Brown, he had his opportunities with Green Bay. If you're not going to get done with Aaron Rodgers, I don't really know how much you're going to get done with Justin Fields. Byron Pringle, again, had his opportunities, was fantasy relevant at the end of last season, but that was also with the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. And that offense, typically speaking, historically speaking, he's really just kind of a guy. Maybe you think about him in the waiver wire, but not somebody I care about this time of the year for drafting purposes. Khalil Herbert is the other guy I'm interested in. If you drafted David Montgomery, you want a handcuff. Yes, Herbert is definitely worth drafting as a handcuff, a high-end handcuff to David Montgomery. We saw that he was in that role where he gets the starting amount of work and gets the workhorse role. He can definitely produce at a high level for that amount of time until David Montgomery is able to come back. So that's kind of what I would be looking at as far as Chicago goes outside of the major four.
Yeah, and it's hard just from the wide receiver perspective too, because a lot of them are banged up. So you don't see a lot of Equanimeous St. Brown. Byron Pringle has not played a single snap in the preseason, or I think so. I need to double check some of that, but he
hasn't.
Yeah, so we have not seen much out there. So yeah, I love the idea of at least Khalil Herbert too, because if Montgomery does go down, you know that he's going to be fed. And I know some people really like the idea of having Treston Ebner, this rookie that they got out of Baylor. And I like him, but I think that they might still stick, especially with the running between the tackles. Herbert was known as a zone type of runner, and that's what type of scheme that they're going to be running a lot more. But also, got a comment from Nomad. I'll definitely hop on. Post your email, and I will send you, and we can connect, and I will hop on your show. Thanks. But yeah, so let's go through some questions, because I got some questions for you as well, because I actually have a fantasy draft coming up, and I've never done a 12-person draft. And the 12 spot, I'm doing some mocks out there, and I have no idea who the heck to draft, because I'm looking at that and I see Saquon, and part of me just goes, maybe this is his year. So my first question is just Saquon. Is he a smart pick at that 12 spot, or where do you sit with him?
So it's when you're at the 12 spot and you get the 12-13 flip, right? And you get the back-to-back, you get the end of the first round, beginning of the second round. So it does put you in a tighter spot, because there's certain guys that you know that if you pass on there, you're just not going to get. They're not going to come back around to you. So you have to kind of take that into consideration with who do you want. I would say I'm okay with it, with Saquon being in one of those two spots, because you're going with the upside there, and because you're picking back-to-back anyway, you can pair him with a safer floor player. Let's say like potentially a Stephon Diggs and a Saquon Barkley is a possibility, I would say, probably for you. Things of that nature. So I wouldn't be off of them there. Is that higher than I have him? Yeah, I think I have Saquon Barkley actually at 16, 17 right now, just kind of more reflective of the injury risk. But the volume should be there. I do think people are overblowing a little bit how good they think Brian Daboll can actually make this Giants team be. It's still a hell of a jump that they need to take. But if he's healthy, and more importantly, if he's getting the passing down work, which is what every indication from camp has been, you're looking at a Saquon who could have a very safe floor as long as he's out there and healthy on the field. So I wouldn't have a problem with that. I would want to pair him with a high floor player with him, though, with that other pick.
Yeah, because that's the hardest part when I was looking at that 12 spot, because it's like, all right, I could get Alvin Kamara. I've seen kind of pop up there too. Do you know if he's actually going to be playing, or how do you feel about Kamara?
So Kamara, if he should be rising his ADP right now that we know that he's not going to get suspended this year. They've already kind of talked about that. His court case again got pushed back to September 29th. If you listen to Ian Rappaport, you listen to Adam Schefter, it sounds like it could very well get pushed back again from that point. And also keep in mind, whenever he does have that court hearing, it's only the first court hearing. Nothing's going to be decided in that first one right there anyway. Yeah. So it's pretty much already kind of been decided that he's not going to get suspended this season. Right now, his ADP is reflective of being around that territory. A lot of drafts that I've been doing lately, I'm doing with a lot of other experts, have kind of recognized the fact that he's not getting suspended. So he's going much higher now in the first round. But if you're in home leagues and they're using an ADP cheat sheet, a current ADP cheat sheet, or a rankings right now, you might be able to get away with one, because he's still considered in that teenish area, where Alvin Kamara, really, he's a top 6 running back if he's not going to be suspended. So if you could pair up a Kamara and a Saquon Barkley, that would be perfect.
I might have to do that unless someone from that fantasy league is listening right now, and then they'll probably nab him right there. But we do have a question from Jackal out here. I have pick 9 in a 10-man full PPR snake draft. Who should I target?
I mean, so that's obviously is going to depend on who's available. My guys that I've been targeting in that range, in that back end of the first round, I'm typically looking receiver at that point. The elite running backs, for the most part, have come off the board. I have seen some instances, and I want to put this out there, Najee Harris falling that low. He's kind of that hit or miss guy that some people have him inside the top 5. Some people would rather take the wide receiver. If Harris is there at 9, go ahead and pull the trigger. But otherwise, I'm probably targeting Stephon Diggs there. You're likely already going to see Kupp, Jefferson, and Jamar Chase off the board. So I would probably go after Stephon Diggs, someone along those lines.
So, and for those listening right now, I just posted some of the links out to Dan's Twitter and Dan's YouTube. So if you're like what you're hearing, besides the coffin fit that he's going through right now, like we said, he's battling through some COVID right now. So we definitely appreciate it. You good over there? Gives a thumbs up.
Working through it.
So another question too. How do you personally handle defense and special teams? Because I know for me, like I just, if I find one that I like, I'll just kind of draft it. But I've also heard some people, their strategies are to just not even draft one and then just go week by week by week and just pick someone up when they can. I guess, what's your strategy?
So it depends. When I go into a draft, I usually like to take a defense that I know has a good week 1 matchup. If I can find a defense that has a good week 1 matchup and is actually a good defense, then even better. The Eagles, for instance, is one I'm targeting pretty hard right now because I believe they play against the Lions week 1. It's either the Lions or the Jets. And then they have a really good defense prorated out for the rest of the season. Comes to defensive kicker, though, don't be afraid to stream. But if you only have a top 3-1, Evan McPherson, Justin Tucker, Matt Gay, a couple of those guys. With kickers, it's offenses. If you can get offense that you know is going to score a lot of points, especially if they play in the dome, I like to attack those guys too. But don't spend a draft pick higher than the last 2 rounds. There's really no point to it because a lot of times the guy you pick up off a waiver wire is going to be worth more than the guy you drafted anyway.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, you seem like you're struggling now after the 30-minute points. One other question that I got for you. So you are a 49ers fan, and
Correct.
You said week 1, and it made me think about this. Who do you got week 1? Bears, 49ers? What's your thought? What do you think is going to happen that game?
So I would, I'm a 49ers fan. I would think the 49ers would win that game. However, I think it'll be close. The 49ers are not set up to blow people out anymore. Especially the defense can be a little bit better. We'll have to see. But the interior of the defense might be more susceptible to the running game. And then you still have to work out what kind of offense you are with Trey Lance. Hasn't had much practice time with Deebo Samuel. He's still been working back with the contract extension. He's still just getting back into shape here. So I do think that game will actually be pretty competitive, but I do think the 49ers will win out 23-17.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll definitely be a great game first week. And honestly, it's going to be the most interesting. And I feel like taking our biases out of it, it's going to be one of the most interesting games because Trey Lance, Justin Fields, 2 new offenses that after this first week, there's going to be a lot of just crazy headlines. There's going to be whether the offense is in shambles or the offense is the next greatest thing in the world. Like there's not going to be any normal headlines, I feel, after this first game.
No, it's a shame too, because it's going to be week 1 and there's really going to be no way to tell the rest of the season after one game. But because there's so many eyes on these 2 players, yeah, whoever performs well is going to be, the next coming, and whoever doesn't is going to be a bust, and they need to trade him and get out of it right away. And it's really going to be no in between.
Yeah. So that about does it for our show. Jason Cooper could not hop on the show, but he's battling the hurricane. It looks like it got the best of him, unfortunately. But Dan, thank you so much for coming with the sickness, but still being able to hop on and give out some great fantasy football advice. Everybody, make sure to follow and search for MD's Fantasy Football Show that's out there. I don't listen to many fantasy football shows, but when I do, it's his show. It's an amazing show. Make sure to like it. And also, how can people follow you, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brad. So first of all, social media at BellyUpMDFF Show. Anywhere on social media is where you can follow us there. We're posting out content every single day, player news updates with fantasy football takes. We have, of course, the MD's Fantasy Football Show YouTube channel. And then make sure you check us out your favorite podcast app. We're available, Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Spotify, all of them. 5-star reviews, much appreciated. And our rankings are up too. So if you go to the bellyupfantasysports.com website, you can catch our rankings up there. We also have our latest episodes in a tab, but use that. Because you can download it. We have it set up so you can download it when you go to your drafts and use it as a cheat sheet to kind of help you guys out too.
I'll definitely be downloading that. I need all the help that I can get. But thanks again, Dan, for coming on. And everybody, stay till the very end so you can hear Dan's voice on the outro. But thanks again, Dan, and Unbearable Sports Podcast. We're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.
Thank you for listening to this Belly Up Sports Podcast Network product. Some said we go belly up, so we made it our name, and we're still here.